In this section, I'd like to talk about ambiguity in context-free grammars and context-free languages. We will cover 5 topics. First, I will introduce the concept of parse trees and the yield of parse trees. Then, I will define the ambiguity in context-free grammars in terms of the number of parse trees a member string has. After that, I will introduce leftmost derivations of a member string W generated by a grammar. And then, we will use this property that each parse tree has a unique leftmost derivation to prove a grammar is ambiguous. And finally, we will talk about the ambiguity in context-free languages and its relationship with ambiguity in context-free grammars. So first, let's talk about parse trees. A parse tree of a string W tells how W is derived using production rules of a grammar G. In the parse tree, there are 3 parts. The first one is the root, and the root must be the start variable of the grammar, S. The second part is interior nodes, which are labeled by variables. And interior nodes can only be labeled by variables, not terminals. And the third part is leaf nodes, which are labeled by terminals or epsilon. And leaf nodes can only be labeled by terminals or epsilon, and it cannot be labeled by variables. So if we have a structure like this, the parent node is A, and the children nodes are x1, x2 through xn. A can only be a variable because it's an interior node. But for those children x1 through xn, they can be either variables or terminals or epsilon, depending on their position. If some xi is a leaf node, then it is a terminal or epsilon. If some xj is an interior node, then it's another variable. This variable can be the same as the parent node. So if we see such a structure in the parse tree, then that means there is a grammar rule A to x1, x2 through xn in the grammar. And this applied to every such structure in the parse tree. Now let's see an example. This grammar has only one variable s, and it has 4 rules. From s to asb to bsa to ss or to epsilon. This grammar generates the language of balanced a's and b's. And we choose a sample string w equals abab to show you a parse tree. The parse tree I constructed for this WABAB is like this. The root node is S. And it has 2 children nodes, S and S. This corresponds to the rule S to SS in the grammar. And for the left child, it has 3 children nodes, A, S, and B. And as I said before, if we see such a substructure, that means there is a rule S to ASB in the grammar. And that is true. And we see the same substructure in the right subtree. Finally, for that ASB, we still have the variable, so it's possible that it can be replaced with other terminals or variables or epsilon. And in this case, it is replaced by epsilon. The rule S to epsilon is applied. If we traverse the leaf nodes from left to right, then we get a string A epsilon B A epsilon B. And if we simplify this string, it is equivalent to ABAB, which is our sample string. So as I said before, this is a parse tree for this ABAB. And this ABAB is the yield of this parse tree. Formally, the yield of a parse tree is the the concatenation of labels of the leaves in left to right order. And the yield only contains terminals. Now that we know the definition of parse trees, we want to use it to define the ambiguity in context-free grammars. By definition, a context-free grammar G is ambiguous if there exists a string generated by this grammar that has two distinct parse trees. LG is the language generated by this grammar G. Let's use the same grammar G and WABAB to prove that this grammar is ambiguous. We want to show that this string WABAB, which is generated by this grammar, has two distinct parse trees. Here I have shown two distinct parse trees for this string. The first one is the one we just talked about. The second one, this one has root node S, and this S has three children nodes, A, S, B. This corresponds to the rule A to A, S, B. And now we also have a variable S in the second level. This S is the root of the subtree below it. And this S has three children nodes, B, S, A, and this corresponds to the rule S to B, S, A. Again, in the third level, we have an S, which is expanded to epsilon using the rule S to epsilon. Now let's visit the leaf nodes from left to right. We have A, B, epsilon, A, B. If we simplify that, that's equivalent to AB, AB, which is equal to our sample string W. So these two parse trees are legitimate parse trees for this W, and they are different. So this grammar is ambiguous because there is a string generated by this grammar that has two distinct parse trees. Next, we talk about leftmost derivations of a string. By definition, a derivation of a string W in a grammar G is a leftmost derivation if, at every step, the leftmost remaining variable is the one replaced. And we denote such a derivation with S derives W with an L under the arrow. Let's use our old friend, grammar G and WABAB. I have provided three derivations. The first two are leftmost derivations, and the third one is a rightmost derivation. Let's see the first one. From S, I apply the rule S to SS as the first step. And then I expand the leftmost S, which is the first S in SS. And I apply the rule S to ASB. Now we have a string ASBS. We have two S's in this string. The next rule, S to epsilon, is applied on the first S, the leftmost S. So we have the resulting string as ABS. Now we only have one variable, and it's expanded to ASB. So the resulting string is now ABASB. We only have one variable, so we expanded that one. And we use the rule S to epsilon. So we get the string ABAB. This is a leftmost derivation of W. Let's see another leftmost derivation of W. First, I apply the rule S to ASB. And then I apply the rule S to BSA. Since there's only one S in ASB, this is the leftmost S I expand. In the resulting string, I still only have one S, one variable. And that variable is the leftmost one, and it's expanded by S to epsilon. So we have the resulting string ABAB. These two derivations are leftmost derivations because at each step of the derivation, we expand the leftmost variable. Now let's see the third one, which is the rightmost derivation. Similarly, if a derivation of a string W is rightmost, it means at every step of the derivation, the rightmost remaining variable is the one expanded. Let's check that. We have the rule S to SS applied, and then we expand the rightmost S, which is the second S, and we use the rule S to ASB, so we get a string SASB. After that, we have two S's in SASB. We expand the second one, which is the rightmost one, and we expand that as X to epsilon. So we get the string SAB. Now we only have one variable. This is the rightmost variable. We apply S to ASB to expand this variable. So we have ASBAB. And finally, we apply the rule S to epsilon to the remaining S. Now we have ABAB as the final result. All these three derivations give us ABAB. We talked about parse trees and the leftmost derivations. They are related. Each parse tree has a unique leftmost derivation. We will skip the proof of this property, but use it to prove a context-free grammar is ambiguous. By definition, a context-free grammar G is ambiguous if there exists a string generated by this grammar that has two distinct parse trees. But since constructing parse trees are cumbersome and not natural to human brains, we would like to replace this requirement with leftmost derivations, which is more natural for us to write and to think. So instead of showing that a string has two distinct parse trees, we can show that a string has two distinct leftmost derivations. Let's apply this property to grammar G. We want to prove G is ambiguous. We have a two-step procedure to do that. First, we need to find a string W which is generated by this grammar. And the string I picked is ABAB. Second, we want to show that this W, ABAB, has two distinct leftmost derivations. This is easy. We talked about three derivations before, and now we only need to use those first two derivations, which are leftmost derivations. So I just copy and paste those two derivations here. By doing so, choosing the string generated by this grammar and show that this string I picked has two distinct leftmost derivations. By doing these two steps, I have proved this grammar G is ambiguous. This example is easy. Let's see another example. This grammar has two variables, S and A, and 5 grammar rules. The first two rules are S to AS and S to epsilon. And the remaining rules are A to A1, A to 0A1, and A to 01. We want to prove this grammar is ambiguous. We still apply that two-step procedure. First, we need to find the string W that is generated by this grammar. The string I picked is 00111. Next, we show that this 00111 has two distinct leftmost derivations. I provided the details of these two derivations. Let's analyze the first one. In the first derivation, I applied the rule S to AS as my first step, and then I expand the leftmost variable A to 0A1. Now we have two variables, AS, in the string 0A1S. Still, we apply grammar rules to the first variable, which is a. Now the rule applied is a to a1. The resulting string is 0a11s. We still have two variables. We apply the grammar rule a to 01 on the first variable, a. So we have 00111s. Notice this string has my string w as a substring. So the next rule applied is to eliminate this variable s. So I apply s to epsilon to result in the final string 00111. This is the first derivation of 00111, and it's a leftmost derivation because I apply the grammar rules to the leftmost variable at each step. The second derivation is similar. First, we apply s to as. Then we expand the first variable, a. Now we use a different rule. We replace this a as a1. So the resulting string is a1s. After that, we expand a again because it's the leftmost variable. And we apply the rule a to 0a1. So we have 0a11s. Then we apply the rule a to 01, so we have 00111s. Again, since this one contains our string w as a substring, I only need to eliminate the final variable s. Alright, we have talked about a two-step procedure to prove a given grammar is ambiguous. What if we want to prove a grammar is not ambiguous? Well, that's not so easy. Here the goal is to show that for all strings w generated by this grammar, there is exactly one leftmost derivation of w. And this requires a proof by induction on the length of w. I will skip the details. Alright, our final topic. Ambiguity in context-free languages. We talked about ambiguous context-free grammars. What is the relationship between ambiguous context-free grammars and ambiguous context-free languages? First, let's define an ambiguous context-free language. By definition, a context-free language L is inherently ambiguous if every context-free grammar for it is ambiguous. For a context-free language, there might be multiple context-free grammars that generate it. If all of them are ambiguous, then this language is ambiguous. So long as one of them is not ambiguous, then this language is not ambiguous. On the other hand, if a context-free grammar is ambiguous, the language generated by G, LG, may or may not be ambiguous, because LG can be generated by other unambiguous grammars. G is ambiguous doesn't mean other grammars are also so. Being ambiguous is not a good thing, but sometimes we have to accept this reality because it is not always possible to convert ambiguous context-free grammars to unambiguous context-free grammars. What if a language L is inherently ambiguous? Then every grammar that can generate this L is ambiguous. And unfortunately, even if a language is not ambiguous, there exist unambiguous grammars and ambiguous grammars for this language. There is no algorithm to convert an ambiguous context-free grammar to an unambiguous one, even if we know an equivalent unambiguous grammar exists. Alright, that's all for today. Leave a comment if you have any questions.